Okay, I'm going to show you how to grout a mosaic, but this is slightly different because it's all made of crockery. So it's pretty much the same as using normal tiles, but because it's a bit more uneven, it's a slightly different process. But a lot of people have been asking me how to grout, so I thought, right, going to get on with it and I'm going to do a demo. So this piece is finished, and I have already done this and checked it, but as soon as you've finished your mosaic, leave it to dry, and then in that evening just turn it over, tap it on the back and just sweep out if there's any excess bits, and then if you have a few pieces fall off, you can glue them back on and they're ready to grout the next day. So always just make sure everything's dry and ready to go. Okay, grout wise, for this piece I'm going to use a slightly rumpled bag, but this is a Mapei Ultracolour Plus, and it's a really nice grout to work with actually. On the health and safety side, depending on where you're working, cover your desk up, always use gloves and put a mask on. It's pretty stinky stuff. Just make sure it's well ventilated. Sometimes I do it outside, but if you've got the door or window open, you'll be all right. So get your buckets and everything ready. This one is a mix of 3 parts grout to 1 part water. So I quite often use the old hummus pots, and I know it's a little bit tricky. There normally is a guide on your bag as to how much you need, but for a piece this size, I'd probably use about, 3 of these, half a pot for this. This will all depend on what you're doing, so I'm just going to mix up 3 of these. You can be much more accurate than this, but I'll put a bit more in there. Another 3rd one. Okay, and then the same thing with the water. Make sure you've got some clean water and not hot. Okay, and now with the water, I tend to add a little bit at a time. Just going to move this in so you can see it a bit easier. Okay, and then you mix up your grout until it's got sort of consistency. Well, I would say a little bit like whipped cream or sort of double cream, so it's nice and thick. Okay, so just mix it for a few minutes. Okay, so when you've mixed, what I normally do is leave it for a couple of minutes, and then it's just about right. So you can feel it. This is kind of quite squidgy, but stiff enough to use. Now, if you had a nice flat tiled mosaic, you'd be able to use one of these sort of grout floats. So just in case anyone wants to kind of learn that, you can actually put your grout on and you can spread this out, which pushes into all of the gaps really evenly. But because I only ever use plates and crockery and buttons and bits, I tend to have to use my gloves quite a bit. So what I tend to do is work on a sort of a small area at a time. So I actually kind of apply, you can do a little bit with your mixer, but you can hear the scrunching. It's actually much easier to just do it by hand. So you just squidge in the grout. You've got to do this quite quickly, just because then you've got a nice even colour. Push it into all the holes. Sometimes if I've got buttons, I cover them up with a bit of masking tape or blue tack if they've got a lot of pattern, and then you don't get the grout into it too much. Now my wooden bit, I like to keep those as clean as possible, because usually I varnish them or cover them first. You can put sealant on as well so the grout doesn't stick too much into the crackles and things. So just push it all in. And I often say to my students that if you like your mosaic before it's grouted, you will absolutely love it once it's grouted, because the grouting is like the icing on the cake. It just gives it a lift, it kind of gives it an outline. And I'm not sure if I said I'm using this colour is called anthracite, and it's a lovely dark colour, and I do quite often use a sort of dark grout. I always joke I'm a bit of a white grout snob. It's just sometimes white grout can work really well, but sometimes it can just cheapen things a little bit. but it could, you know, you just get a very different look of a mosaic. And maybe if I end up making more videos, I might just show some examples of things with different coloured grouts, because it can really kind of make or break a piece of work. So I'm just going to keep going with this for a bit. Okay, so keep going, make sure you've got in all the holes, and what I tend to do as well is just go along the edge of the panel, just so that there's no gaps in between. There's loads of things you can do to edge your panel. You can frame it, you can just paint it if you can't be bothered to do anything else. Painting the edge is fine. You can get metal strip, so there's lots of different options. But the main thing, I mean, this is going to be an internal piece, but the main thing is to really make sure you've got all of those holes filled. Much more important if the piece is going outside, because what you don't want is any air holes where moisture can get in. So just really fill it all in. You can see it is much more fiddly than doing a mosaic where you're just using tiles, but I love it because it's like doing an archaeological dig, and you're trying to sort of like ooze out your bits and pieces and discover what's under there. So when you've done that, you need to just get the worst of the grout off, just any kind of real excess. I tend to do this as well with my gloves. This is why you've got to make sure you leave yourself plenty of time to grout. It's not something you want to rush. Take your time and enjoy it. A lot of people seem to be sort of frightened, they're really worried about grouting, but grouting is lovely. It's great. I love grouting because it's the finishing of the piece. It literally is like the icing on the cake. So just really give yourself some time, really enjoy it. So I'm just going to show you this top bit to start with. So I've got pretty much most of the excess worked out, and then you can leave it for a few minutes before you're wiping it off. And what people often do is they tend to kind of rush this stage too much, so give yourself a bit of time, leave it for a few minutes, and then you want to give it a nice wipe with a sponge. Don't tend to kind of don't spread the water too much, really wring your sponge out. This is a great tiler sponge actually. I think Bal do them, Ardex do them, lots of suppliers, but it tends to kind of, it doesn't drip like a lot of normal sponges do. It's very, very good. So I just tend to give it a couple of wipes, and then try not to do too much. Leave it again for a few minutes. So just make sure with your sponge, keep it flat. And what I tend to do is wipe it and then just turn it over and do your other kind of wipe with the clean bit of the sponge. So make sure you sort of wring it out between sort of applications, and then when you're happy with it, it will kind of look really mucky and you think, oh god, it's all going to dry out. The thing is to just sort of keep an eye on it, and then when you've wiped the worst of it off, then leave that for maybe 5 minutes depending on the temperature, and I'll let you know what we've got to do next. Okay, so after a few minutes you should just be able to polish it off, and if you look closely, if you're wiping, so I use loads of kind of old sheets and t-shirts and things as rags, otherwise you get through loads of posh rags, so just use any old thing. Just cut them up. If you do this too soon, the grout will smear across the crockery and it will just sort of you'll be just pulling the grout out, so it'll have just started to dry, and you should be able to just polish it off nicely. Turn it around, you can still see it's probably a little bit wet. I may give it a few more minutes, but I'm just going to show you a little bit more before I leave it to rest again, because I can get a bit impatient even though I'm telling you not to be. What I use is the magic screwdriver, which with crockery is fantastic. So you just get an old screwdriver, not your best one. So I have lots of different sorts of sizes for these things, and you can actually dig bits out. So this is really good to do just as it's drying, because if you do it when it's really dry, it's much harder to dig out. If it's too wet, you're just digging the grout out completely. but quite often you'll find things. This is what I was talking about, the archaeological dig, but you'll find things underneath that you didn't know were there. And sometimes cleaning with a rag, because it's a little bit uneven or can be a bit uneven, you don't always get all the detail. So sometimes I just dig around like that. I mean, a lot of the time this comes off straight away as you're wiping down with the rag, but if you wanted a little bit more definition, like here on the circle around here, you can just push it back with a screwdriver. But you can see it's not smearing here. It's a little bit smeary there. I'm just going to leave it for a little bit longer and do another polish. Okay, so that's you grouted. It's all done. So I tend to kind of fiddle a little bit, so that's normally a good time to stop and go and have a cup of tea. Just check you've got no holes or gaps anywhere. Make sure they're all filled in, and go and have a break, and then later on in the evening or the next day even, just give it a little polish up, because sometimes it's a little bit dusty over the top, and have a think about how you want to frame it.